Hi, I'm Georgia Raisman. I'm here this morning on Front Up with Dr. RoccoMonto, who's the Chief Administrative Officer at Nantucket Cottage Hospital. He's also an orthopedic surgeon and the author of a really wonderful book called Fountain. So today I'd like to talk first about a little bit about the hospital, but even before we get to that, tell me about your background and what brought you to orthopedic surgery and what brought you to Nantucket.
Well, that's a lot. I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in the Ironbound, which is a little neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey. It's named the Ironbound because it's actually locked in by railroad tracks. So I grew up in a really urban environment in the inner city. An Italian family, I grew up in a relatively second-generation immigrant family. And as we grew up and did things, I was never really a great athlete until I got to college and to high school, and I picked up the pace a little bit. We moved from the Ironbound up the hill, as it were, to the suburbs in West Orange, and there I started to play soccer, which was a relatively kind of new sport for a lot of Americans then, but we had a lot of immigrants in the area. So then I started to play soccer and became more athletic, and with the athletics came injuries, right? Mm-hmm. With the injuries came orthopedic surgeons, so I got to meet a lot of interesting surgeons, and I have to admit I always thought, if these guys can do it, I can do it. Well, there's that kind of, my self-centered view of the world that has been the theme of my career. But then I went off to college early. And then over time, when I realized I wasn't going to make it as a soccer player, I was lucky enough to find a way to.
You settled for medical school?
I was lucky because actually I was trying to play soccer in Europe, and things didn't work out for me. But luckily, Ray Brienza, who was the father of one of my old nemesis, a midfielder named Dave Brienza from South Orange in Columbia High School. And he noticed, he was the dean of NYU Medical School as well. Uh-huh. And he also used to write the Trotter column for the Star Ledger. And he noticed that I still had a spot available, and tracked me down on some faraway beaten up farm in France, and medical school,
wonderful.
NYU.
What a wonderful story.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So did you know when you were in medical school that it had to be orthopedics?
Yeah, I didn't want to be a surgeon. I think in medical school you find yourself kind of decide, am I a medical doc and an internist type of sort of a detective, or are you a fixer? I guess I'm a fixer.
Just thinking that. And then you've had a long career with the Soccer Association and a very public career. Yeah. And how did you get to Nantucket in all that way?
Everybody's got their journey, right, to get here. I mean, mine was very circuitous. I started off after I trained at Duke, and then I went off for finishing school, as it were, to Stedman Hawkins, which was a fellowship in shoulder and knee. And I came out, like a lot of guys, came out ready to tackle the world, and found myself in a small private practice out in Philadelphia. And I absolutely hated it. I just felt like I was just being ground down. I was taking care of a lot of professional athletes, but it wasn't satisfying for me. I just didn't have any way to change the course of how medicine and where it was going then. So a friend of mine who was an ER doc was doing some time on Martha's Vineyard and said, hey, we need an orthopedist. Do you know somebody? I said, hey, take me, please. Get me out of here. And despite a lot of consternation and hand-wringing, I started there. And that's where I started there in 1996, and spent a number of years there before we started to see patients from Nantucket. And then I realized Nantucket was a better island to be, because it was better to be here to have more impact on the practice. I loved Martha's Vineyard, and I loved the people there, and I loved the practice there, but I found things were much more productive and much bigger impact on the medical landscape here, and the direction and where we were going. We could build something here, and that was very attractive to me.
So what sort of orthopedics can be practiced here? I mean, is this, are you doing school sports kinds of injuries, or elderly people's injuries, or both? Or
a lot of things. I think probably when you look at my practice profile compared to the real super subspecialists, specialists that you see all over the country. We're groups of 20, 30 guys. Well, one guy does the right shoulder, one guy does the left shoulder. I do the index finger. My practice is very broad. There are still some things where I'm not comfortable working, like spine or really complex trauma cases, which we shouldn't be doing in an island environment. But over the past 3 decades, and it's been that long, I hate to say that it's been that long, I've realized what you can do very well here, and I think it's a reflection of where community orthopedics is going in general, where rural orthopedics is today and where it should be. And I kind of like the way we practice here. I really like that. I think it's very personal. It's certainly not everybody's cup of tea, but I think when it works, it's incredible. You can really get great results, but you have to be selective about what you do here.
And so I was always under the mistaken impression apparently, that there are not many operations performed here on island.
Oh, no, we do a lot.
You
Actually,
do?
we're way busy. And I think that's also, though, mirrors what's going on nationwide. I think that there are certain things you should be doing in community hospitals, things like whether they're appendectomies in general surgery or in orthopedics, arthroscopy, or minor hand cases or shoulder cases. What shouldn't you be doing in your big complex cases? Those are reserved for where you need the kind of extensive resources. But in this type of environment, the personal side of it plays a big role in healing, and I think it also gives us more attention to detail here. We take the little stuff more seriously. That's
so how
way.
how did you become the chief administrative officer here too? That also sounds like a fairly
I think they ran out of
time-consuming-
jobs for me. I think they wanted to keep me involved in it. I was the president of the medical staff. We all kind of rotate through that job. And I think that's a function of where the administrator wanted me to be in giving them advice, particularly as we transition to a new building and a new practice model, which is probably even more. I think people misunderstand what's going on. I think you see the construction going on in Prospect, and you think, oh, this is this new medical edifice. That's not the real reimagining. That's not the real construction. It's how we're changing in the model that we're going to be delivering to the patients
So
here.
how is that changing?
Well, we're going to become more of a rural health clinic, more of a multi-specialty practice where you would come in and basically have the availability and more importantly, the access to many different aspects. It gives us more cohesiveness in care. It allows us to take a more intensive approach to our patients, to really be able to take care of all their needs, not just what we think is important. We'll be able to offer alternative care and complementary care, and also begin to do things that are more preventative. And that's kind of where I've been going anyway with what I've been doing
So
in my
the
career.
physical structure just enables more of that interaction? Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, this is a medical reawakening, a reconstruction of how we really should have been taking care of people all along. Because, as doctors, we're always good at fixing things as a fixer, right? But what we really need to do is to prevent things. And it's much more powerful to do that. I think it makes more sense. And I think people are more comfortable with that. I think that's where we're going. And that's where we can really make the impact. Again, I could go to New York or LA and be in a group of 50 orthopedic surgeons, but where else am I going to be able to make this kind of impact?
So it's a more meaningful practice.
Yes,
in a lot
it is
of ways.
a more meaningful life here.
So the next thing that I really wanted to talk with you about is the authorship, because I don't know where you found the time, both in being a doctor, being an administrator, and then writing this book, because this book, which I'm going to show, The Fountain, I just finished reading a couple of days ago, and I have to say, I read the introduction, which is a very chatty and friendly introduction, and said, okay, this is very nice about how I should live my life and how I should make 60 the new 30, and all of this is very chatty. And then I get to chapter 2, and I am zonked by the science.
Then the hammer came down.
The hammer came down, talking about cells and DNA and methylated cells and mTORCs, and oh, God. So the science is really dense, and the deep dive into science is dense. And I realized that you've done this, having read the whole thing, you did that science in order to show us that this is not just how how do you live your life, good advice, listen to me, I know what I'm talking about. This is a way of saying that everything that you say in here, albeit chatty in part, is supported by a huge amount of knowledge, and a huge amount of knowledge of what's currently being researched and what's currently being decided by the most eminent scientists out there. So tell me, how did you get started on this? What prompted you as an orthopedist to come and decide that you're going to write a book about how people ought to live their lives so that they live better as they get older?
Well, part of it is because my work in an area of medicine which really sees sometimes people at their worst, in their worst situations, where the failings of medicine are most apparent, whether that's people whose bones are failing, their muscles are failing, their system is going. And it goes back to my just general belief that maybe instead of being a fixer, I should be a builder. And I think that's part of where I've been going. So actually patients ask me a lot about how to stay fit, stay healthy, how to stay out of my office, which is where I prefer them to not be. It's also a reflection of what I went through personally, and I think, I told you my journey is self-centered, but when it comes down to tipping points, the tipping point for me was a personal crisis, and that's where I get a little bit chatty. But how you get better from being in a bad place to getting healthy again is not so easy, not even for someone who thinks they know what they're talking about.
And you said a very striking statement. You said you were not afraid of dying, you were afraid of living, and meaning that you were afraid of living in a debilitated state. And the debilitated state could come about because of living the wrong way all of those decade after decade.
Yeah, I mean, I watched my two parents live their lives and die in different ways, and lived in different ways, and that has left a very deep mark on me. I watched my father, who was a very vigorous guy, just calling me up trying to score Viagra scripts, when he could, which is, talk about uncomfortable conversations, right? Try to do that with a pharmacist in South Orange. But to be serious, he was working out and living a vital life until the very end. And then I watched my mom slowly wither away, not taking care of herself, not able to do the things that she could do, and it just compounded one thing after another. So you see that in front of you, this slow motion train wreck, and you're like, what can I do so that I don't do that? But more importantly, if I can find a way around that, can someone else find a way around that? And as it comes down to it, it's a hell of a lot of work trying to figure that out. You would think that all these answers would be there, that someone's opinion would be valid. But the scary bit for me was how little real data there was. And when the data was there, how awful it was. I'm still a research-based scientist. I mean, my background is in orthopedics and regenerative medicine, but still applying those kind of standards to nutritional medicine, not great.
No, it's amazing. The things that we sort of take for granted,
Sure.
Especially the things that we've taken for granted about saturated fats and not eating butter, and almost all of that gets thrown out of the window in this book based on the most recent science, except for the fact that obesity is bad for you and exercise is good for you.
Right.
Which is an oversimplification.
Exactly. But then we don't need a book for that, right? I can give you a handout on
right.
that. Right. I mean, the thing about all this is that it's one thing to say it, right?
Right.
There's the why, right? But then there's the how. Right?
Yeah.
And this book gets to the how. Like, how does all this come about? Like, what do we know? And actually, it turns out that when you start looking at everything's all together, there's this beautiful symmetry that starts to come out. And it's all really about metabolism of the body, that our flexibility is really what has allowed us to evolve and be at the top of the chain here. But it's also our weakness. And we have to learn what our weaknesses are and what our strengths are. So, there's definitely a hammer in that book, but you get through that. And I think it forms this very, very strong foundation that you can apply to anything. Because it's not just, the book isn't just about nutrition and diet. It's about connecting and learning the importance of where social interactions are, maintaining the family cohesion structure,
Right.
and
Leading a
undoing
meaning-
some of the
leading a
things we
meaningful-
do in our
right.
society that sabotage our health.
Well, and you leading a meaningful life, and all, to
Yeah.
mention that.
Yeah.
But you also talk about you debunk a lot of fad diets.
Yeah.
You point out things that vegetarians and vegans have to watch out for. You talk a lot about who in fact needs to be gluten-free and who is only thinking they need to be gluten-free.
Right.
Who shouldn't be eating a lot of high protein stuff. But what I was thinking about too is what if you give people advice generally, but if you were, what advice would you give to somebody who was 20, somebody who
Sure.
was 30, somebody, how do you
It
how do you think
changes,
about
right?
that?
So when
That's
you're
what's interesting,
20,
it
right?
changes.
Yeah, you're 20, you're building muscle, building strength, building a life, right? So in that type of world, getting strong is important. Being strong, being physically strong is a critical thing. A protein diet, a higher protein diet makes sense, right? Building connections that will help you later. Not isolating yourself right off the bat, thinking, "Well, I've got to work on me first." No, sorry. As the father of a couple of millennials, I know how easy it is to slip into that mode. But I think that there are ways to do this without being obsessive about diet, and not obsessing about diet and fitness, but making it an integral part of your life so that habit becomes your health later.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important in your 20s. When you bridge into your 30s, well, then maintenance becomes a real critical part. You can't eat those high protein diets because you don't need the growth hormone anymore, because with higher growth hormone starts creeping in higher risk for cancers and other bad things like
Well,
diabetes.
who knew that? I mean, this is what's so
Exactly.
fascinating about this
Yeah.
book, and this is
So-
true on a cellular level. This is
Yes.
not some chatter that we hear.
So I look at the 30s for me as getting that ideal body type that you want, building those long-term relationships that are going to feed you. That's when you find your meaning. It's hard to do that later. It really is. It's hard to reinvent yourself. God, I really admire people that are able to do that, shift their emphasis in careers. But I know people in their 30s already talking about retirement. That's crazy. You should be talking about what you can do, really, instead of thinking about changing the world. That's when you start changing from the little bits, the little corners.
Right.
Save one person.
Right.
You don't have to save everybody. But I think the first person you save is yourself. You start integrating yourself generationally. You connect to your parents a little bit better. Connect to your sibs and to your nephews and nieces. You start to build relationships. The only trend I don't like is that it seems everybody's putting off marriage and families longer. And I'm not saying everybody should get married, but I do believe that building these core family structures are important, and it helps you live longer,
Right.
live more successfully, and to make more impact on your community.
Right.
And it maybe and how you define a family for me is many different ways, whether that's friends, whether that's community. But getting integrated and doing things is the time you do that is in your 30s.
Right.
As you transition into the 40s, then you have to start thinking, okay, now I have to have a more rigid diet that's more structured. I can't just go crazy on protein. I have to exercise now regularly, right? You have to make time to
People
build
say
a
your
community.
metabolism slows down in the 40s.
I
Is
don't
that
think
true?
it does so much, except that we slow down, and metabolism is a reflection of that, right? There's no scientific studies that show that. So that if you maintain that vigorousness, that well, they always say, like on football, the physicality, right? I'm not even sure if that's a word, but there you have it, right? So, but maintaining a physical life, right? Building that in becomes harder in your 40s. That's really the hardest time, because that's where
got
most
kids, you've
people,
got jobs,
yeah,
you've
that's
got-
where most
where's
people
the
kind of
time?
lose their way a little
Right,
bit,
where's
you
the
know, tend to
time?
cloister off. I need my alone time, a circle of silence or whatever.
Right.
You don't need that.
Right.
Also, you need to be able to begin to build the life that's going to carry you forward, right? So you need to make that investment, right? That investment in time into your family, to your children,
And work. Yeah.
Work. Meaningful work,
Right.
Not just work. If you don't like what you're doing, do something
Do something else, right.
Exactly.
Right.
Right? I mean, I think
Hopefully you know that in your 30s where you can still make that change.
Not everybody does, because, adolescence has been extended.
That's true.
It really
All
has.
the way
and,
up to the 30s.
and again, maybe, this is where we are today. That's okay. We live longer. Maybe that is a better way of looking at things. I'm still trying to sort all that out, as we all are. But I do think when you get to your 40s, then you have to start thinking, okay, I need to double down here and get some stuff done.
Well, it is so interesting, though, going through this about how your physiology and your cell life changes and your cell demands change as your decades pass, and your protein needs change, so that you have high protein here, and then you get to be 80, and lo and behold, you need more protein.
Yes,
in between you
it dips, and then it comes back up, and then as you get older, right, then you got to step it up, because now you got to build again. Right, because you have to fight a little bit some of the natural aging processes of the body, which is to start to have trouble monitoring and controlling your nutritional needs. You have to really work on strength. It becomes a really critical part of all this. So sometimes I think people get too hung up on this type of exercise or that type of exercise, but I mean, it all is beneficial. But I do think that the real theme throughout this is that strength training and more high intensity, less time demanding exercise probably is something that's more sustainable over a life.
And in the book you point out that all of these forms of exercise are useful because they have a cellular effect. They help our DNA. They help all of these processes that lengthen our telomeres, but not too long. I mean, the whole thing is extraordinary on a microscopic level.
Actually, I think if I had to describe the book in one word, it's change. Your body changes, your needs change, your body adapts.
And the change can be deleterious if you don't do anything at all, and yet you can affect the change positively if you act in a positive way.
I mean, life is this fluid dialogue between your DNA and the environment outside of you, ever changing. It's effervescent. I mean, it's just always changing. You exercise, for example, within 10 minutes, there are anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 genetic changes that occur. Shifts in the way the chromosomes look.
It's astounding.
Yeah, it's actually, it's a little creepy, but it's way cool. And I think when you start to do that, you begin to appreciate this model, this beautiful machine that we live in. As you say, as above, so below, right? It's the Hermetic philosophers, right? So there's an art and beauty to all this, and I think for me, the real lesson I got from writing this was to appreciate that more, and it made me just work a little harder to appreciate this machine that I've been given, and to try to preserve it and do the best I can, and also to kind of take a little bit more time to connect.
Well, the last thing I'd like to talk about, because we're really getting close to the end, is because it's a boogie of mine, is that people get so down on big pharma, and at the very end you have this story about this rapamycin and this amazing discovery on this obscure island, Easter Island out there in the Pacific, where scientists first discovered and then ignored for decades, and then rediscovered this extraordinary extraordinary bacteria, am I saying the right thing? That became the basis for a series of medicines that over a lot of time and over a lot of expense and over a lot of diligence by a lot of scientists became the basis for a series of medicines that are now fighting every kind of cellular change, negative cellular change on every kind of level. I
use one myself, tacrolimus, for when you have any type of inflammatory problem.
So I think and inflammation seems to be the root of everything. I mean,
it is really, when you think about it.
The one bad thing, it's inflammation.
Well, it's a crazy story, I mean, it really is the voyage to the end of the world. I mean, the scientists in Canada, we're looking at places that were isolated, because scientists love isolated places because they have more control over the environment, right? And the minute that they heard that the Chilean government was going to put an airstrip to kind of bump up some tourism to Easter Island, they were on that. So they outfitted an old freighter, And what started out as a little adventure became a journey, with millions of dollars, hundreds of people involved, the
All that
Canadian
collection,
government. Yeah, it's incredible.
Which then got ignored for all that
Yeah,
time.
and then it wound up in the back of some guy's refrigerator.
Right.
Yeah, in the
The mark,
freezer.
do not eat.
Exactly. Don't eat it. Okay, I won't eat the crazy bacteria. But now that medication today is fighting cancer, fights rejection of organs, for transplants, fights inflammation of all types, and may be the key to living longer. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing, and it's all because of, we hate to say it, big pharma.
Well, I think, not to get on any type of soapbox, I would say that, today, right, many of the discoveries are made in the laboratory. But in the 60s and into the 70s, they were made in these obscure, exotic places where the jungles of Amazon,
Right.
it was fun hunting for the blood orchid, right?
Right, exactly.
But
exactly.
now we can go into the lab, and once we know what kind of receptor, we build it on a computer. But then you had to find these things in the wild, and it's fascinating stuff.
Luckily we have them, and luckily we can get
Yeah,
them
luckily we
developed
have
and then put them to good use.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your talking with me about this, and thank you so much
My
about
pleasure.
all of this. And by all means, pick up the book. And once you get
Yeah.
past the science chapter, believe me.
Don't worry, science is fun.
I know, it is fun, and actually
It's
the
way
rest of
cool.
the book is very, very cool. I
Great.
really enjoyed reading it, and I got a lot out of it. So
Great.
thank you so much. Thanks
My
again
pleasure.
for coming.
Take care.
Appreciated it.